following stories are about people that received organ transplants who had unexpectedly taken on certain traits of their organ donors. Jamie Sherman. In 2002, Jamie Sherman from Tucson, Arizona, was a psychology student at Arizona State University. But at the age of 25, she underwent a heart transplant at University Medical Center, as she'd been battling a heart defect since she was born. Before the heart operation, Jamie claimed that she had hated sports of any kind and detested Mexican food, but she loved Italian food, especially pasta. However, after the operation, her behaviour changed somewhat, and she appeared to take on a very different persona. For some inexplicable reason, she began to love sports of all kinds, from football to baseball and basketball, and began to follow all kinds of sport. She couldn't get enough. She also started loving Mexican food, which had now become a favourite. Jamie could not understand what was happening to her and started to ask questions as to how this could possibly happen. She did some research and read about people who'd had heart transplants and then started to develop new tastes and new traits, just like she had. She did further research and managed to trace the organ donor, how she received the traits of a donor. Eventually, Jamie was able to meet the family of the donor, and on their first meeting, the mother just stared at her, stating, "You look so much like my son." After much discussion, she was able to find out a lot more about her donor. His name was Scott Phillips, and at the time of his passing, was 29 years old. He had lost his life after receiving head injuries at a Phoenix bar. He was also a huge sports fan that loved Mexican food. He also played sport at Kansas State University. Jamie Sherman did not need to learn about a donor's lifestyle from his family, because before she had even met them, she had somehow adopted Scott Phillips' love of sports and Mexican food. To make matters even stranger, she also dreamt that she had met him and thanked him, where he replied, "Jamie, I am so happy for you." This dream seemed to bring her closer to him. As a psychology major, her professors told her that it was all in her head, but Jamie is willing to believe that there are things that we cannot explain. How else could her food choice and lifestyle change so drastically after receiving his heart? Bill Wall. During his work life, Bill had a classic Type A personality, with a temperament that was characterized by excessive ambition, aggression, competitiveness, drive, impatience, and a need for control with an unrealistic sense of urgency. He was a classic candidate for coronary disease and other stress-related ailments. Bill was also an overweight businessman in his early 50s that had him jet-setting around the world. But on Easter Sunday 1999, his Type A personality had finally caught up with him, where he went to the emergency room for what he thought was food poisoning, but doctors discovered he had suffered a massive heart attack. Wall was told he needed a heart transplant, but at the time was too sick to receive one. Over the next 6 months, Wall was hospitalised 17 times, and on the 22nd of February 2000, Bill had a heart transplant. But Bill's heart transplant was not only to change his lifestyle, but would go on to change his personality. 5 years later, in 2005, at the age of 58, Bill had totally transformed his life, where he not only worked part-time, but spent most of his life winning awards for speed and performance, and received medals in swimming, cycling and track work, and also ran a charitable foundation. His life also changed in other ways, where he now had slowed his life down to take time to smell the roses. He once surprised himself by crying when he heard the British singer-songwriter Sade, who up till that moment he had never heard of. This is something he would never have dreamed of before the transplant. Months after the heart transplant in 2000, Bill always believed he'd received the heart of a young car accident victim, but he could never be sure as the hospital never disclosed who the donor was. This policy was in place for many years, but the rules were then changed, and recipients were then able to write letters to the surviving members 6 months after the transplant. Bill eventually received the letter informing him of who his generous donor was, and found out that he'd received the heart of a 36-year-old Hollywood stuntman who had been super fit and super athletic. His name was Michael Brady, but used the stage name of Brady Michaels, and who was a stuntman for Universal Studios who specialised in aerial skydiving and appeared in action films, TV shows, along with TV commercials. On the day of his passing, he was to parachute onto the top of a moving train for a TV show called I Dare You. His parachute landing was a success, but unfortunately, whilst climbing up the iron ladder on the side of the train, had accidentally fallen, hitting his head and instantly losing his life. Bill was advised by Brady's parents that their son was a good man who volunteered with children and assisted with AIDS patients in California. He later met up with Brady's family, where Brady's brother Chris brought out a stethoscope and asked him if he could hear his beating heart. It was at this point that Chris said to Bill that Brady loved Sade. Bill was shocked to hear his brother's comment and wondered whether there was some sort of connection, and was a part of Brady now living inside Bill, with not only his love of Sade, but his newfound love of sports, fitness, sensitivity and altruism, just like Brady. Claire Sylvia. In 1988, Claire had a heart-lung transplant at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. At the time of her transplant, Claire was a 47-year-old ex-ballet dancer who had a strict dietary regime and was extremely careful what she put into her mouth. Unfortunately for Claire, she had developed primary pulmonary hypertension that had led to her needing a heart-lung transplant. 5 months after the operation, she had a vivid dream about a tall, thin young man whose name was Tim, whose surname begins with L. In the dream, they kiss, and as they do, she inhales him into her. It felt like the deepest breath she has ever taken. The kiss and inhalation seemed to unite her and the young man. She then woke up with the name Tim L on her mind. When she woke up, she asked the nurse about the donor, who would only tell her that he was a young man from Maine who had passed in a motorcycle accident. Strangely though, after the transplant, Sylvia appeared to have a change of personality and started to take on the traits of her 18-year-old male donor. Sylvia suddenly developed a craving for beer, green peppers and chicken nuggets. As she was health conscious and before the transplant, she would never have dreamt of touching beer or chicken nuggets. Sylvia also said that she now felt that the very centre of her being was not hers. Friends commented to her that after the transplant she appeared to walk like a man and became strangely attracted to blonde women, as if reacting to male energy. She now had a restless energy and had a craving for junk food. In 1990, she managed to trace the identity of her donor through his obituary in the local paper. As in a strange dream, his name was Tim, and his surname did begin with the letter L. After finally meeting his family, she learned that Tim had a restless energy who had a love of junk food, especially chicken nuggets and drinking beer. So, how can people inherit traits from their donor? There is a controversial theory called cellular memory or systematic memory, with the idea that cells or even atoms or molecules contain the living being's memory and energy, which are transferred in a donated organ. University of Arizona psychologists who had previously studied near-death experiences said the theory was developed after studying 10 heart transplant patients who had reported donor-related changes. In one case, a male patient who received a woman's heart had a short time after developed a preference for the colour pink and a desire to wear perfume. There have been various explanations for this personality change, from the toxic effects of the strong transplant drugs, the heavy anesthesia, to the psychological trauma of knowing that someone had died so that you might live. Nevertheless, in the 3 cases I've just read, some transplant recipients genuinely claim that they had inherited the traits and tastes of the organ donor.